Dawn broke over the Arizona desert as Solace Freeman awakened to the thunder of hoofbeats circling her cabin. 24 Navajo warriors sat mounted in perfect formation around her home. War paint gleamed on their faces in the early light. Their leader, a stern man with silver threading his black hair, stared directly at her door. His hand rested on the tomahawk at his belt. Solace pressed her back against the rough cabin wall. Her fingers found Marcus's old rifle leaning beside the window. The weapon felt cold and foreign in her trembling hands. She had fired it only twice since her husband died, both times at rattlesnakes. The warriors began a low rhythmic chant that rolled across the desert like distant thunder. Each voice joined the others until the sound seemed to rise from the earth itself. Solace closed her eyes. Yesterday felt like another lifetime. 24 hours earlier, she had been hauling water from her well when she found him. The Navajo Scout lay crumpled beside the stone rim, blood seeping from a gunshot wound in his shoulder. His breathing came in short gasps. His eyes had fixed on hers with desperate hope. She should have walked away. Any sensible woman would have. In this territory, helping Indians meant signing your own death warrant. The territorial papers were full of stories about savage raids and innocent settlers. Deputy Marshal Pike reminded everyone that good Christians kept their distance from heathens. But the man by her well was dying. His lips were cracked from thirst. Blood loss had drained the color from his face. When he whispered a single word in broken English, water, Solace felt something crack open inside her chest. She had given him water. Then she had dragged him into her root cellar and tended his wounds with strips torn from her good dress. The same dress she had worn to Marcus's funeral 3 months ago. The scout had told her his name. Joaquin Begay. He spoke of his wife and daughter waiting for him to return from what was supposed to be a peaceful trading mission. His trading party had been attacked by men wearing cavalry uniforms, but something about the attack had been wrong. The leader wore no official insignia. The men had taken their goods but left their bodies for the buzzards. Joaquin had escaped only because his horse had been shot from under him near a rocky outcrop. He had crawled for miles before collapsing at her well. Now as the chanting continued outside her cabin, Solace understood the price of her mercy. She had been living alone on Marcus's mining claim since a cave-in had crushed her husband's chest and her dreams in one terrible moment. The land was all she had left. 160 acres of hard desert earth that broke her back every day she worked it. But it was hers. The deed bore both their names in careful script. At least it had been hers until yesterday. Samuel Cartwright had been circling her property like a buzzard since the funeral. The wealthy rancher owned half the valley already. He wanted her silver-rich claim to complete his empire. His offers started reasonable and grew more insistent each week. When politeness failed, he sent his men to remind her that a woman alone was vulnerable in dangerous territory. Deputy Marshal Pike had been no help. The territorial mining office kept losing her paperwork. Her neighbors looked the other way when Cartwright's men cut her fence lines or spooked her horses. Last week, while searching through Marcus's belongings for anything to sell, she had found the letter hidden in his tobacco pouch. Her hands had shaken as she read his careful words describing the massive silver vein running beneath their land, worth more than they had ever dreamed. But the letter carried a warning too. Powerful men were watching, waiting for any excuse to take what they wanted. The chanting stopped. Solace opened her eyes. The silence stretched across the desert like a held breath. The war chief dismounted slowly. His moccasins made no sound on the hard-packed earth as he walked toward her door. She had chosen mercy over safety, compassion over common sense. Now judgment had come riding out of the desert with painted faces and weapons sharp enough to end her story before it had barely begun. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Solace Freeman straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She thought of Marcus and the way he had faced the collapsing mine shaft. no fear in his eyes, only love for the life they had built together. If she was going to die for saving a man's life, she would die standing. The knock came soft against the weathered wood. 3 gentle taps that seemed to echo across the empty desert. Solace set down the rifle and walked to the door. Her bare feet made no sound on the rough planks. She lifted the wooden latch and pulled the door open. The war chief stood before her with his hand no longer on his weapon. His dark eyes held something she had not expected to see, respect, behind him. The mounted warrior sat in perfect stillness, waiting. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise. "My brother lives because of your kindness." The war chief's words hung in the desert air between them. Solace felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not an ending, a beginning. "By Navajo law, his debt is our debt. You are now under the protection of our clan." Hasty Bege stepped back and gestured toward the root cellar. Joaquin emerged slowly, his arm still bound with strips of her wedding dress. The morning light caught the gratitude in his dark eyes. He spoke rapid Navajo to his brother, then turned to Solace. "The men who attacked us were soldier clothes, but their leader had no uniform markings, no official papers." Solace nodded. She had seen the inconsistencies in his story take shape during the long night of tending his wounds. Cavalry units carried orders. They buried their dead. They didn't strip trading parties clean and leave bodies for scavengers. Joaquin's voice dropped lower. "I recognized the belt buckle. Silver with a running horse. The man who shot me wore it when he gave orders to kill my friends. Protection." The word echoed in Solace's mind as she watched the mounted warriors maintain their silent vigil. She had lived without protection since Marcus died, had grown accustomed to checking shadows and sleeping with one ear open. Now these men offered safety she had never asked for and wasn't sure she wanted. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. Dust rose from the eastern trail. Solace counted a dozen riders moving fast toward her cabin. At their head rode Samuel Cartwright on his prize stallion, Deputy Pike beside him with his hand resting on his sidearm. Hasty Bege moved to stand between the approaching riders and Solace's door. The warriors shifted in their saddles but held their positions. Joaquin disappeared back into the root cellar without a word. Cartwright reined his horse 20 yards from the cabin. His eyes swept the circle of Navajo warriors with practiced assessment. He had fought Indians before. The scars on his hands told that story. But his voice remained steady when he called out, "Mrs. Freeman, seems you've gotten yourself into a dangerous situation here." Solace stepped onto her porch. The wooden boards creaked under her weight. She kept her hands visible, and her voice calm. "These men mean me no harm, Mr. Cartwright." Cartwright's laugh carried no humor. "Indians don't visit white women to discuss the weather, ma'am. They come for horses or scalps, or worse things decent folks don't mention." Deputy Pike spat tobacco juice into the dust. His badge caught the sunlight as he shifted in his saddle. The territorial government takes a dim view of settlers who consort with hostiles, especially when those hostiles have been raiding honest ranchers all summer. Hasty Bege spoke without turning around. "We have raided no one." The deputy's hand moved closer to his gun. Funny how every savage says the same thing when they're caught red-handed. A wind rose from the desert floor, carrying dust and the scent of sage. Solace watched Cartwright's men spread out in a loose line. Their weapons remained holstered, but their intentions were clear. She thought of the letter hidden in Marcus's tobacco pouch, the warning about powerful men who waited for any excuse. Now they had their excuse. "Mr. Cartwright, I appreciate your concern for my safety, but as you can see, I'm unharmed." Cartwright guided his horse closer. His eyes never left Hasty Bege's face. "That could change real quick, Mrs. Freeman. These savages are unpredictable. One minute they're trading beads, the next they're burning homesteads." He paused, letting his words settle into the silence. Course, if you were to reconsider my generous offer for your land, you could relocate somewhere safer. Somewhere civilized folks don't have to worry about Indian troubles. The pieces fell into place with awful clarity. Cartwright hadn't ridden out here to rescue her. He had come to witness her destruction, or better yet, to orchestrate it. A woman, found dead after harboring hostile Indians, would be a tragedy. Her unclaimed land would revert to territorial custody, available for purchase by any interested party with proper connections. Solace felt something harden inside her chest. The same cold determination that had carried her through Marcus's funeral and the endless days of grief that followed. "I'm not selling, Mr. Cartwright." Cartwright's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on the reins. "The offer won't stand forever, ma'am, especially given current circumstances." He gestured at the warriors surrounding her cabin. "Folks might start thinking you're in league with these raiders, providing them information about settler movements, supplying them with goods they can't get through honest trade." Deputy Pike nodded gravely. "That would be consorting with hostiles. Federal offense, hanging offense, depending on what kind of aid was provided." The trap closed around her with surgical precision. Harbor the wounded scout and face charges of treason. Turn him over to die and live with the knowledge that her mercy had limits after all. "Hastian." Begay spoke again, his voice carrying across the desert like distant thunder. "My brother's trading party was attacked 6 days ago. We have been tracking the men responsible. Their trail leads to this valley." Pike's tobacco-stained smile widened. "Convenient story, Chief. Real convenient." But something flickered in Cartwright's eyes. A moment of recognition quickly suppressed. Solace caught it and filed it away with all the other pieces that didn't fit the official narrative. "You have 48 hours to come to your senses, Mrs. Freeman. After that, I can't guarantee your safety. The territorial authorities are already discussing whether your property should be declared abandoned due to Indian hostilities." Cartwright wheeled his horse around. His men followed in tight formation, their dust cloud hanging in the still air long after they disappeared over the eastern ridge. Solace remained on her porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then she looked at Hastian Begay, who had never moved from his protective position. The war chief turned to face her. His expression held questions she wasn't ready to answer and commitments she wasn't sure she could honor. But for the first time since Marcus died, she wasn't facing the fight alone. The silence stretched between them after Cartwright's dust settled. Hastian Begay remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the eastern ridge where the riders had disappeared. His warriors held their positions in the desert heat. Joaquin emerged from the root cellar. His face had gone pale during the confrontation, but his eyes burned with recognition. The man with the silver buckle. He was here. Solace felt the ground shift beneath her understanding. Cartwright. The running horse etched in precious metal that caught sunlight when he gestured. The same buckle Joaquin had described from the attack on his trading party. The scout's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I saw him give the order. Kill them all," he said. "Leave nothing for the buzzards to carry tailies." Hastian Begay turned slowly toward his brother. His weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You are certain?" Joaquin nodded. He pulled a small piece of torn silver from his medicine pouch. The metal was bent and scratched, but the partial engraving of a horse's head was unmistakable. "I tore this from his belt when he shot me, before I fell from my horse." The evidence hung between them, small and bright in the desert sun. Solace stared at the fragment of silver and felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Cartwright's knowledge of Indian movements, his convenient appearances after raids, his insistence that her land was too dangerous for a woman alone. He had been orchestrating the very violence he claimed to protect her from. The revelation hit her with the force of a flash flood in dry earth. Marcus's death. The convenient cave-in that had crushed her husband and cleared the way for Cartwright's offers. The missing safety supports that Marcus always checked twice. The timing that left her vulnerable and alone. Hasty and Begay studied her face. You understand something we do not. Solace walked to the edge of her porch. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and merciless under the climbing sun. She had thought she was fighting for her survival. Now she realized she was fighting for something much larger. My husband died in a mining accident 3 months ago. The supports failed in a section he had reinforced the week before. The war chief waited. His people understood the weight of unspoken grief. Cartwright made his first offer to buy my land the day after the funeral. Understanding passed between them without words. Joaquin touched his wounded shoulder where her bandages still held his healing flesh together. The same mercy she had shown him had been stolen from others, from his trading companions, perhaps from her own husband. The wind picked up, carrying dust devils across the hardpan. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it circled overhead. Hunting. We need proof, Solace said finally. Evidence that will convince territorial authorities. Hasty and Begay gestured toward his warriors. We have the testimony of survivors. 3 men escaped the attack on my brother's party. But testimony from Indians won't carry weight in territorial courts. You know this. The truth settled over them like the desert heat. Heavy and inescapable. In this territory, Navajo words carried no legal weight against those of white men. Especially white men with political connections and deep pockets. Joaquin straightened despite the pain in his shoulder. There is another way. The man Cartwright uses to lead his false cavalry attacks. I wounded him. Before I fell, cut him deep across the face with my knife. Solace considered this. A facial scar would be distinctive. Memorable. But finding one scarred man among Cartwright's dozens of employees would be nearly impossible. The sound of approaching. Horses interrupted her thoughts. A single rider this time, moving fast from the south. Deputy Pike rode alone, his badge glinting in the harsh light. He reined his horse well outside the circle of Navajo warriors. Mrs. Freeman, need to speak with you about a serious matter. Pike's voice carried official authority now. The lazy corruption from earlier had been replaced by something sharper. More dangerous. Seems there's been another Indian raid. The Morrison homestead. Whole family wiped out. House burned to the ground. Hasty and Begay's jaw tightened. We have been here since dawn. Your own eyes confirm this. Pike spat into the dust. Funny thing about Indian raids, Chief. They tend to come in waves. Coordinated attacks by multiple war parties. He fixed his gaze on Solace. Territorial authorities are taking a real dim view of settlers who provide aid and comfort to hostiles, especially when those hostiles might be gathering intelligence for future attacks. The accusation hung in the desert air. Solace felt the trap closing around her with mechanical precision. Another convenient raid. Another dead family to justify whatever actions Cartwright deemed necessary. When did this attack occur, Deputy Pike? Last night. Around midnight, best. We can figure. Joaquin stepped forward despite his brother's warning gesture. At midnight, I was unconscious from fever. This woman spent the night tending my wounds. She never left my side. Pike's smile held no warmth. Convenient alibi, ma'am. Real convenient. But Solace caught something else in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty. Pike was following orders, but he wasn't sure of the details. Someone else was orchestrating these events from behind the territorial authority. The deputy gathered his reins. You've got until tomorrow evening to reconsider your position, Mrs. Freeman. After that, I can't guarantee what charges might be brought. Treason carries a heavy penalty in this territory. He spurred his horse toward the eastern trail. But before he reached the ridge, he turned back one final time. Oh, and Mrs. Freeman, Mr. Cartwright asked me to mention that his offer for your land stands until tomorrow sunset. After that, circumstances might make such transactions impossible. The horse and rider disappeared over the ridge, leaving only dust and implications in their wake. Solace remained on her porch, weighing her options against an impossible timeline. 48 hours to prove a conspiracy that reached into the territorial government itself. 48 hours to gather evidence that would convince authorities who might already be compromised. 48 hours to save not just her own life, but the lives of every settler and Native American caught in Cartwright's expanding web of violence. Hastian Bege moved to stand beside her porch. His presence was solid and reassuring in the shifting uncertainties. "We will not abandon you to face this alone." Solace looked out at the warriors who had ridden out to honor a debt of mercy, men who could have taken her horses and supplies, but chose instead to offer protection. Men who understood honor in ways the civilized world seemed to have forgotten. She thought of Marcus and the way he had always said that doing right mattered more than doing easy. Then we need to move fast. And we need to be smarter than they expect. The desert wind picked up strength, carrying the scent of distant rain. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising change. They planned by firelight as storm clouds gathered overhead. Hastian Bege had sent most of his warriors to establish camps in the surrounding hills. Only 3 remained with Joaquin and Solace around the small fire behind her cabin. The territorial governor arrives in 6 days for his annual inspection tour. If we can present evidence directly to him, bypass the local corruption. Solace spread Marcus's survey maps across a flat stone. Her finger traced the boundaries of her claim and the surrounding properties that had changed hands over the past year. Every piece Cartwright acquired came after some kind of tragedy. Indian raids, mining accidents, families driven off by violence. Joaquin leaned forward despite the pain in his shoulder. His voice carried the weight of personal loss. My trading party was returning from Fort Sumner. We carried silver and turquoise to trade for winter supplies. Cartwright knew our route, knew what we carried. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows on their faces. Solace studied the map and felt patterns emerging from what had seemed like random violence. He's been systematically clearing valuable land, making it available for purchase by creating the very dangers that drive people away. Hastian Bege poked the fire with a long stick. Sparks rose into the dark sky. 3 families from our band have been killed in the past 2 seasons, always when they traveled to trade, always when they carried goods worth taking. But the official reports blame tribal warfare, competition between clans for hunting grounds. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Solace pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and thought about the careful construction of Cartwright's deception. He needs witnesses. People who can testify to his version of events. Deputy Pike provides legal cover, but someone else must be coordinating the actual attacks. Joaquin touched the torn silver in his medicine pouch. The scarred man. I wounded him badly. He will carry that mark for life. Finding him means getting close to Cartwright's operation. Close enough to identify his hired killers. That means taking risks none of them could afford. But the alternative was accepting defeat and death with quiet dignity. Solace made her decision in the space between thunderclaps. I know where Cartwright keeps his business records. His ranch house has an office where he meets with territorial officials. If we can find documentation of payments to his men, schedules that coincide with the attacks. Hastian Bege shook his head slowly. Too dangerous. His ranch is guarded. Armed men patrol the grounds day and night. But not during the governor's visit. He'll want his best men visible and respectable for the official inspection. The ranch will be lightly defended. The logic was sound, but the risks were enormous. Getting caught would confirm every accusation Cartwright had made, would justify whatever retribution he chose to inflict. Rain began to fall in fat drops that hissed against the fire. They moved into Solace's cabin and continued planning by lamplight, the small space filled with the warmth of shared purpose. Joaquin spoke softly about his wife and daughter waiting at the winter camp, how they would prepare special foods for his return, how his daughter had been learning to weave patterns that told stories of their ancestors. Solace found herself sharing memories of Marcus, the way he had hummed while working the mine, his careful hands as he repaired broken tools, the dreams they had shared of building something lasting in this harsh land. Hastian Bagay listened without comment, but his presence anchored there. Grief to something larger than individual loss. We fight not just for ourselves, for all those who have been stolen from. The rain intensified, drumming against the cabin roof. Outside, the desert drank deeply of the rare moisture. Come morning, the hardpan would be soft enough for new growth. They divided responsibilities according to their strengths. Joaquin would gather testimony from the attack survivors scattered among various Navajo camps. His knowledge of traditional roots and clan connections would speed the process. Hastian Bagay would coordinate with other war leaders whose people had suffered mysterious losses, build a network of witnesses willing to testify despite the personal danger. Solace would use her knowledge of territorial legal procedures to prepare their case, draft documents that would carry weight with Governor Hayes, present evidence in terms that would compel official action. But first, they needed proof that would convince a skeptical politician more interested in avoiding scandal than pursuing justice. The lamp flame flickered as wind found cracks in the cabin walls. Solace adjusted the wick and studied the faces around her small table. 3 people thrown together by violence, bound by the simple recognition that some things were worth risking everything to protect. Joaquin dozed fitfully in Marcus's chair, his wounded shoulder propped with borrowed pillows. Healing would take time he didn't have, but his spirit remained unbroken by the brutality he had witnessed. Hastian Bagay sat perfectly still, his eyes reflecting the lamp flame. A man accustomed to making life and death decisions for his people. Now he had extended that protective responsibility to include one isolated widow and her impossible claim to justice. Solace felt something shift inside her chest. The fear that had ruled her life since Marcus's death was transforming into something harder and more useful. Determination forged in the fire of shared purpose. She thought about the letter hidden in Marcus's tobacco pouch, his warning about powerful men who waited for any excuse to take what they wanted. Now she understood that waiting was their mistake. Sometimes the prey had to become the hunter. Thunder crashed directly overhead, shaking the cabin walls. The storm had arrived with desert suddenness, turning the dry earth into temporary streams and pools. By dawn, the land would be transformed. Solace blew out the lamp and listened to the rain reshape the world outside her door. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and impossible choices. But tonight, for the first time since Marcus died, she was not alone. The debt of mercy had become something larger, a bond that transcended the artificial boundaries of race and tribe and territory. An alliance built on the simple recognition that dignity mattered more than safety, that some things were worth defending even when the odds were impossible. The trap closed with the precision of a steel jaw. 2 days after the storm, Deputy Pike returned with papers bearing territorial seals and accusations that would see Solace hanged. Federal cavalry rode behind him in tight formation. 20 soldiers led by Captain Morrison, a weathered man whose eyes held no malice but carried the weight of unwanted duty. He dismounted slowly, his uniform bearing the dust of hard travel. "Mrs. Freeman, I'm placing you under arrest for providing aid and weapons to hostile Indian forces." The forged documents rustled in the morning wind. Statements from unnamed witnesses. Bills of sale for rifles and ammunition. Evidence manufactured with careful attention to legal requirements. Solace stood on her porch with her hands visible and her voice steady. "Captain, I've sold no weapons to anyone." "I have no weapons to sell." Morrison's jaw tightened. He had clearly hoped this would be simple. A guilty woman caught in obvious wrongdoing. Not a composed widow who met his eyes without flinching. "These papers say otherwise, ma'am. Territorial authorities take treason seriously in these parts." Hastian Bege emerged from the cabin with his hands raised. His warriors had melted into the desert before dawn, following plans made in whispered conferences. Only Joaquin remained, hidden once again in the root cellar. The war chief's voice carried quiet dignity. "This woman has harmed no one. She gave water to a dying man. Nothing more." Pike spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Convenient story, Chief. Real convenient that you happen to be here when we arrive with a warrant." The deputy's smile held vicious. Satisfaction. He had waited years for an opportunity to destroy someone beyond his reach. Now the law itself had delivered her into his hands. Captain Morrison studied the scene with tactical eyes. A woman alone facing charges of treason. Navajo warriors willing to die defending her. Evidence that seemed too convenient and witnesses nowhere to be found. "Ma'am, these are serious allegations. But I'm bound by military law to investigate thoroughly." Before taking action, Pike's expression darkened. "The warrant's been issued, Captain. Your duty's clear enough." Morrison ignored the deputy and addressed Solace directly. "If you've done nothing wrong, you'll have opportunity to prove it at your hearing." But they both knew hearings could be manipulated. Witnesses could disappear. Evidence could be manufactured or destroyed. In territorial justice, the powerful wrote the verdicts before trials began. Solace felt the weight of impossible choices: surrender and face certain death, resist and confirm every accusation Cartwright had manufactured, run and abandon everything she had fought to protect. The silence stretched between them until dust devils began forming in the distance. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of another storm building beyond the mountains. Then Joaquin emerged from the root cellar. His appearance changed everything. The wounded scout walked slowly toward the soldiers, his bandaged shoulder visible beneath his torn shirt. His voice carried across the hardpan with quiet authority. "Captain, I am the man this woman saved. No weapons pass between us. Only water and mercy." Morrison straightened. His military training recognized truth when he heard it spoken without fear or calculation. "These documents claim Mrs. Freeman sold rifles to your war party." Joaquin shook his head. "My trading party was attacked by men wearing cavalry uniforms. This woman found me dying and chose compassion over safety." Pike stepped forward aggressively. "Indian testimony doesn't carry legal weight, Captain. You know that." But Morrison was studying Joaquin's wounds with professional interest. The bandages, the careful medical attention that had saved a life, the kind of aid a woman trained in frontier medicine might provide. "Who attacked your trading party?" The question hung in the desert air. Joaquin reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew the piece of torn silver. The metal caught sunlight as he held it out for Morrison's inspection. "The man who shot me wore this buckle. I tore it from his belt before I fell." Morrison examined the evidence with growing interest. The partial engraving was distinctive, expensive, the kind of belt ornament worn by wealthy men who wanted their status visible. "Do you recognize this craftsmanship, Deputy Pike?" Pike's face had gone pale. He glanced toward the eastern ridge, where dust clouds suggested approaching riders. Cartwright's reinforcements arriving on schedule. "Could be anybody's buckle, Captain. Indians are known for making up stories, but Morrison was no fool. 20 years of military service had taught him to recognize lies and the men who told them." The deputy's nervous glances, the convenient timing of Accusations. The political pressure to act quickly without investigation. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Cartwright rode at the head of 24 armed men, his silver buckle glinting in the harsh light. The same buckle that matched the fragment in Joaquin's palm. Morrison saw the connection immediately. His hand moved instinctively to his sidearm as tactical awareness flooded his thoughts. Trap, ambush, civilians, caught in crossfire. Mrs. Freeman, step away from the building. Salas understood. Morrison had recognized the setup but couldn't act on suspicion alone. He needed proof that would stand in military court. Evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Cartwright reined his horse 20 yards from the soldiers. His voice carried practiced authority and political connections that reached into territorial government. Captain Morrison, glad to see you've apprehended the conspirator. My men are here to ensure she faces proper justice. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Mr. Cartwright, didn't expect to see you here. Man's got to protect his investments, Captain. This woman's been harboring hostiles and providing them intelligence about settler movements. The accusation was delivered with smooth confidence. But Cartwright's gaze kept drifting to Joaquin and the piece of silver evidence that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed deception. Joaquin stepped forward despite the weapons trained on him. His voice cut through the tension with the force of absolute truth. This is the man who ordered my friends killed, who shot me and left me to die, whose buckle I carry as proof of his crimes, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. 20 federal soldiers, 24 hired gunmen, 1 wounded scout and a widow facing charges of treason. Truth confronting power. In the harsh light of desert justice, Morrison made his choice. Mr. Cartwright, I'll need to examine that belt buckle of yours for comparison purposes. Cartwright's hand moved instinctively toward his belt, then stopped. 20 federal soldiers watched his every gesture. The silver buckle that had been his pride now marked him for what he was. Captain, I don't see how my personal effects relate to military business. Morrison stepped closer. His voice carried the authority of federal law and 20 years of service. Humor me, Mr. Cartwright. The silence stretched across the desert like heat shimmer. Cartwright's men shifted nervously in their saddles. They had signed on to intimidate settlers in stage raids, not face down federal cavalry in broad daylight. Pike cleared his throat desperately. Captain, we have our orders regarding the woman. These other matters can be sorted out later. But Morrison had recognized the truth in Joaquin's steady gaze. The kind of certainty that came from witnessing horror and surviving to tell about it. The captain had seen enough frontier justice to know when law and order were being perverted for private gain. Mr. Cartwright, the buckle. Cartwright's facade cracked. His voice took on the edge of a cornered animal. This is harassment, Captain. I'll be filing complaints with territorial headquarters. Morrison drew his sidearm in one smooth motion. His soldiers followed suit with military precision. 20 rifles trained on Cartwright's hired guns, who suddenly found themselves outmanned and outgunned. The buckle, now. Cartwright's hands shook as he unbuckled the silver ornament. The running horse design gleamed in the harsh light, its craftsmanship matching the torn fragment in Joaquin's palm perfectly. Morrison held both pieces together. The break was clean and unmistakable. Evidence that would stand in any court, military or civilian. Joaquin's voice carried across the standoff with quiet satisfaction. Justice for my friends who died. Justice for the families he destroyed. Pike made one last desperate play. Captain, even if Mr. Cartwright made mistakes, the woman still faces federal charges. The warrant stands. Morrison examined the forged documents with fresh eyes. The timing. The convenient witnesses. The pressure to act quickly without investigation. Deputy, I'm placing you under military arrest for conspiracy to commit treason. The real treason. The words hit Pike like physical blows. His face went gray as he realized his political protectors, couldn't save him from federal justice. Cartwright made his choice. Rather than face trial and certain conviction, he spurred his horse toward the eastern ridge. His hired men scattered in all directions, their loyalty extending only as far as regular pay. Morrison let them go. Better to have them running scared than fighting desperate. The important thing was ending the conspiracy that had turned the territory into a killing ground. The captain holstered his weapon and turned to Solace. His expression held something approaching respect. "Mrs. Freeman, I apologize for the accusations. Your courage in harboring this man likely saved more lives than you know." Solace nodded but felt no triumph. Too many people had died for Cartwright's greed. Too many families destroyed by manufactured violence. Hasty and Begay emerged from the cabin carrying Marcus's hidden letter. The paper bore her husband's warning about powerful men and their patient hunger for silver-rich land. "Captain, this may explain how the conspiracy began." Morrison read the letter carefully. His military mind cataloged the implications and evidence trails that would need investigation. The territorial government would require thorough cleansing. But that was work for politicians and prosecutors. His immediate duty was simpler. "Mrs. Freeman, your land rights are confirmed and protected under federal law. Anyone threatening your claim will answer to military authority." 3 weeks later, Territorial Governor Hayes arrived for his annual inspection to find half his appointed officials under arrest and the other half fleeing ahead of federal warrants. Solace stood on her porch watching the official procession kick up dust on the Eastern Trail. Justice moved slowly in frontier territories, but it moved. The guilty would face trial. The stolen lands would be returned. Joaquin had rejoined his family at the winter camp. His shoulder was healing well, and his daughter had learned new weaving patterns that told the story of unexpected friendship. Across tribal boundaries, Hasty and Begay visited regularly with news from other clans. The mysterious raids had stopped completely. Trading parties moved freely through traditional routes. Peace was taking root in soil watered by too much blood. Solace's mining claim produced enough silver to hire proper equipment and workers. She built a trading post where Navajo crafts were exchanged for mining supplies and manufactured goods. Commerce replaced conflict as communities learned to see mutual benefit in cooperation. The post became a gathering place where different peoples met as equals, where children played together while their parents conducted business, where the artificial boundaries of race and tribe mattered less than shared humanity and respect. On quiet evenings, Solace would sit on her porch and watch the sun set over the desert that had nearly claimed her life. The same harsh land that had tested her courage now supported a growing community built on the simple recognition that mercy was never wasted. She thought often of the morning when warriors had surrounded her cabin, how fear had transformed into friendship through one act of compassion toward a dying man, how choosing humanity over hatred had saved not just individual lives, but an entire territory from the cancer of manufactured violence. The debt of honor had become something larger, a bond that transcended every artificial division. A reminder that in the darkest moments, individual courage could light the way toward justice. The desert wind carried the sound of children's laughter from the trading post. Navajo and settler families sharing the evening meal, building futures their ancestors could never have imagined possible. Solace smiled and thought of Marcus. How proud he would be to see what their small claim had grown into. A place where mercy was honored and differences were celebrated rather than feared. The silver mine still produced wealth, but the real treasure was the community that had grown around it. Proof that even in the harshest places, human decency could take root and flourish. Water given to a wounded stranger had returned as rivers of friendship and understanding. The investment had paid dividends beyond anything she could have dreamed. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.